We are live here to chat about the Scarlet Witch movie, aka Multiverse of Madness. I am so excited. I have waited so patiently. The narrator, she was not patient. I waited so patiently these last couple weeks to chat about this, despite seeing it like night zero or whatever you want to call it. I'm thrilled. Not even tonight's boring flash can bring me down. And I absolutely could not discuss it without Kate and Carey. So let's bring them on. Hold on. Let's just work some quick movie magic here and bring in my multiverse of madness. Kate and Carey, how are you guys this week? These past 2 weeks, really.
I've been good.
Well enough. Good enough. I am good enough.
I will take that. Absolutely. Well, before we dive into Multiverse of Madness, let's just check a few boxes. Do we have any news from the last 2 weeks that we should go over?
All I have to kind of let everybody know is that on Friday, so May 20th, is the premiere date of the new Downton Abbey movie.
I'm so excited. It's going to be great.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Downton Abbey never misses. So I'm excited to see what they do with this, especially with it apparently being in a new location, beachside. It's going to be so fun. I'm looking forward to it. Perfect timing right before the, kind of Memorial Day weekend. Speaking of that world, we also got the confirmation, which I know we kind of already knew because we had sort of sleuthed out and put the pieces together, that season 3 of Bridgerton is going to revolve around Penelope and Colin. And I care about one of those two people, so that's better than nothing.
Exactly.
Any other news we should touch on? I know there were like a lot of cancellations and, CW took the axe to a few things right before our last talk 2 weeks ago. But since then, I believe they've canceled Naomi, which I won't dive all the way into it, but I just finished watching the finale and it was really disappointing. That was not great, but I really stuck with it the full season and I was going to continue to stick with it as many seasons as they gave it and defend it regardless. But that show really did not handle writing adults and teens well. But, you lose some, you lose some. And I think they axed a few other shows. I know there was some drama, I think, around Legacies, which is the last of the Vampire Diaries, getting cut short. It happens, but Abbott Elementary is going strong, so I'm going to be okay. It's not even a CW show, but it heals my mental health. All right. Well, should we touch just very briefly on what we watched this week other than Multiverse of Madness before we dive into Multiverse of Madness? We haven't really had a regular schedule of the CW shows. I did finish watching The Flash. It was very boring this week, but last week was kind of cool. What about you, Carey? Did you just finish watching The Flash?
Yes, and I echo your sentiments about this most recent episode. It was ho-hum. The episode last week, I loved it. It was fantastic, I thought. It's one of those sort of episodes that they always sort of have on a show after a major character dies. And it's one of those deals where you have the major character die and you sort of hate that happens. But then you have the episode after where everyone's dealing with the aftermath, and they did it incredibly well. So, yeah, I thought it was fantastic. This episode, this week, not so much.
I'm interested in this idea of them bringing her back to life and how that's probably going to mess up things by destroying the laws of whatever the universe. Like, that's somewhat fascinating to me, but nothing compared to the send-off of her, and kind of feels counterintuitive to it. And everything else this week was just really boring and kind of felt like a storyline we had seen before. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I was like, haven't we experienced like this exact situation?
I don't know the answer to that question other than the fact that the Steel Force mystery or time sickness mystery has gone on for incredibly too long without any sort of clear sort of idea of what it's supposed to be, where they're trying to go. It just seems like they're doing it for taking up time, taking up space. I don't know. And as far as whether they've sort of done this before, it feels like it just feels like they're spinning their wheels with it. I'm not interested in it at all. The thing that bothers me the most is that it's a story that's intrinsically about Iris and what she's dealing with, but they don't use Iris to tell the story, and that's just disappointing.
It is. I'll give them a little credit. There were a couple moments where I could tell they were trying to do right by her. I appreciated them having this version of Nora say, you know, that she followed in Iris's footsteps and became a journalist. I found that was really touching, especially because I didn't like that they've set it up to where Iris's kids don't like her. I find that to be I just don't imagine you write something like that for a character unless you really dislike that character. So I found that backstory that they gave her kind of off-putting for this type of show. So I liked seeing her daughter admire her and follow into her footsteps, and that reference to her was great. But it's just, you know, this whole storyline is going to be very similar maybe to other storylines where she nearly dies or something like that, where everybody's rushing around trying to save her, but you never see her. Or when you do see her, it's just these repeated glimpses of her being in pain or being near death. And that I really don't like elevating female pain in that way without furthering her character. And it's also boring.
That's the most salient point there. It is boring. It's boring television, and there's no way around it. So,
you know what's not boring television? The latest season of The Circle. It's fantastic. 4 new episodes dropped today. We're almost to the finale. This is reality TV that isn't trash, even though every single one of my favorites has got voted off. It's kind of Big Brother style, where it's like basically a popularity contest to try to win money. Who I find popular is not what everybody else finds popular. I am always rooting for the girls that immediately get voted off, but you know, we're out here. I would love to go on a show like that. Be voted off week 1, but like, you know, give it my best effort. Okay. Well, you know, we've covered the highs and we've covered the lows. The highs being The Circle, the lows being The Flash. And we'll save some stuff for the end if you guys want to touch on some other things we watched, but let's talk about the most important point. And for this, I'll put myself down at the bottom and bring you and Kate to the top so you guys can start with your ratings. Before we get into all of the details, the theses, the theories, the everything, is that even the plural of thesis? Theses? Maybe. Before we get into all of that regarding Multiverse of Madness, what would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 5?
I would give it a solid 7 out of 10. You said 5, but solid 7 out of 10.
when I heard that, I was like, 7 out of 5. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so let's go to 10 scale. I'm really, really looking forward to what you guys have to say about this movie. I have to say 6.5, 7. And I could be talked either way, but that's sort of just my initial thoughts. I only saw it once. So 6.5, 7, give or take, is my initial rating for it.
I'm right there with you guys. It's a tepid 7. It's a generous 7 out of 10, but there were moments that were 11 out of 10, and there were moments that get a pity 2, if that. So we really had some highs and lows. in this movie, as is often the case in Marvel movies, where they're trying to appeal to a really large audience by giving any given audience member at least 2 minutes that they would enjoy. So let's start with the highs. Are there any moments from the movie that were like 10 out of 10s for you? What stood out to you that you loved, if anything?
Carey, you can go first.
I'll be honest. The things that I really sort of enjoyed about the movie were it had more to do with the sort of visuals of the movie, the CGI, and that's sort of like an incredibly shallow thing to say about a movie that had the arcs that they tried to cover, but the one battle scene where they were essentially using musical notes to have a battle, I thought that was inventive. I thought that was cool and it looked great. So I really loved that scene. Um, I'm not a huge Doctor Strange fan, so I could sort of take him or leave him. Um, so I'm not heavily invested in his story or his arc or anything along those lines. So it's for me, it's generally like the first movie. It was sort of the visuals that sort of took over, and to a great degree, that's what I appreciated the most about this film. So I know that's shallow, but that's what I like the most.
I mean, I have to agree. I think the direction and the CGI were fantastic. It was the script and the overall general concept was decent, but missed the mark of the where they could have really sold things. Um, because I know at least I know several people that feel the same way that it was markedly more a story about Scarlet Witch than Doctor Strange, and that's why the stronger moments come from her story. And my favorite part was when she has to confront herself, where she sees the other version of herself, and that's the only thing that's able to convince her is seeing the stark reality of what the monster she's become is not only hurting other people, it's what's terrorizing her children, and the other version of herself is the only person that can talk her down, can sympathize with her, can communicate to her that her children are going to be safe and protected. And that part of the movie was really well done.
Yeah, I really loved Scarlet Witch's story. Now, that's setting aside the fact that I also loved her performance. I'm super biased in that front. She's fantastic. She could have a terrible story, and I still would almost definitely like her performance. But I really enjoyed her story throughout this. And I will say, I see in the chat, Stormy's pointed out that she didn't like what they did for Wanda, even though she was going for Wanda. And I think I saw a few people online kind of echo the sentiment of like, there just sometimes feels like there's this level of injustice watching how they write her, because they write her as if she is bad, as if she is a villain. We see her in a sense defeated at the end of this movie. And despite all of that, I liked the themes in her story when it got a chance to actually play out. So, this idea of, when can magic be used, and what is right and wrong around it, and what is connection to family in a world where there is a multiverse and you have many possible outcomes that you can jump around between. How far is too far when it is emotion for somebody else, not emotion for yourself? That to me was a lot more interesting than what I felt like was just an echo of these emotions in Strange. Strange is pining after a woman he can't have. He can't have her in multiple universes. We're led to believe people are different in multiple universes, and yet we still get the sentiment that he will love her in every universe. It makes for great quotes, but it doesn't really make sense, and it just read as much more of a B storyline compared to the grander themes present in Scarlet Witch's storyline, which really makes hers more interesting to me than his. I don't even dislike his story. It's just, it felt like it was a B story that got too much screen time.
Well, and they very much knew going in that they were going to use this parallel between their stories about how he constantly feels like he's the one that has to make the hard decision, the one that has historically had to make it. And he feels like he always has to be in control, and yet he can only see the possibilities not actually truly affect them. For however powerful he is, he's never truly been able to affect it. He just is able to pick out whichever timeline works out the best. Whereas on the flip side, Wanda's never really had power or control. She's always been the thing that has been controlled, whether it be with Hydra, with being part of the Avengers team, being in Westview, and now under the Darkhold. She's always been an instrument for somebody else's manipulation. And the contrast with the fact that she technically does get the power of controlling reality, her lack of control, and the comparisons and parallels between how they view control, how much they have, if they want it or not. It was a really interesting concept that they could have explored. Same with also how it is in means dipping into some darker choice of more great ideas that justify if it ends in good. A full story that if it's straight, even if it's bad, but our specific universe is Strange, it's good. He's allowed to be the one that makes the morally great choices. But if Wanda does, it's bad. And that's a large part of the reason why it felt so disjointed of a story. Because I, going into the movie, was a little hesitant at this idea that she was going to be made the villain, because it is a little repetitious of some of the issues she's already had, and I thought it was a great idea for them to push her into a new phase of her story following WandaVision. If we're going to have to repeat it, let's do it really, really well. And they had the potential, they had the bone structure to do a really great job with it by being very clear that she didn't know that the Darkhold was going to corrupt her, that the Darkhold corrupted her really well-meaning intentions of educating herself in how to control her powers to prevent some catastrophe like they faced. And yet she's vilified for that. She's vilified for trying to prevent what happens. And yes, she does become the villain in the sense that she starts to do things that are bad. She goes and starts to terrorize people all for her own goals. But as a concept, if you're going to have her do that, you need to hammer in that it's not her, the person, it is the concept of corruption and choosing. Either they could have gone choosing things that you don't understand and like letting yourself go to that or whatever else. But instead, they just kind of kept on hitting home this idea that it's bad for her to have the book, but it's okay if our universe is Strange has the book. So
there's just something where it's like she as a character gets absolutely no free pass or empathy, whereas Strange gets endless free passes and empathy.
Yes.
And what's interesting to me is we see, through her, this theme of motherhood vilified throughout. We see her portrayed as controlling her kids, yelling at her kids, as a horror movie elements of her, hunting down other people. and it's never portrayed with any real empathy except towards the end, coming only from herself. Whereas Strange does a bunch of terrible things that frankly I overlook because he's more boring than her. But in his story, we see echoes of fatherhood themes with him and America Chavez. And that is not bad. It's you know, it's kind of buddy copish, whatever. They it's a pseudo father daughter adventure situation. We've seen this come up many times in movies, fulfilling some, I don't know. It's a niche that plays well with audiences, but I think it plays well with audiences because it's always portrayed as good. He can make bad choices. He can be, not really some source of emotional stability or guidance for her. He's literally just there. Half the time, she's sort of parenting him, America, to Strange. And it's portrayed as good because for some reason in this universe, we consistently are supposed to see fatherhood as good and motherhood as evil. And I don't know. They could take it up with their therapist. It was still a good movie regardless, but I didn't miss that. Carey, what do you think?
Well,
I, I think this movie would have benefited from being, and I'm not one of those people that says every movie has to be 3 hours long, but this movie was entirely too short to do the things that apparently they were trying to do. I'm hoping that there is some director's cut that they put out on DVD or whatever the case may be, that maybe sort of adds elements to the to Wanda's story and that sort of thing. Maybe they will. I think this is the sort of movie that might benefit from like a Snyder cut. I'm not saying anyone wants to sit in the theater for like 4 hours, but I mean, it broadens the story, and I think this needed to do more than they were able to do in 2 hours.
I would sit in a theater for 4 hours for Wanda.
I do have a question though, and I think Kate, you spoke to this already, but I'll be honest. Maybe I misread the end of WandaVision, but I did not go into this movie expecting Wanda to still be dealing with the same trauma in the same way of losing her kids. And maybe I just misread that ending wrong. But again, it also may have been a situation, like you said, where the Darkhold took what she had and corrupted it. But I don't know that we really saw that happen to her. We saw what she was doing, but I don't know that we made that connection. I think that would have benefited from that.
yeah, I mean, right after I saw the movie, there was definitely parts of it that I could pick out and really appreciate. And I mean, to be honest, the story as a whole, it did a really great job, but it did a really poor job of really highlighting things that could have sold both of their stories better. It very much, in her case, kind of expected the viewer to put all these things together, and from my interpretation is we are supposed to see Wanda with the Darkhold, understand that the Darkhold is a corruptive element, and anything that you like any person, no matter how good their intentions are, they're going to be corrupted by it. In which case, I don't think it would have been very hard for them to include a scene where you basically see the corrupt whispers of the Darkhold take root in her mind, perhaps voiced by Agatha Harkness. I don't know. But it would be really powerful to kind of show how somebody who has the power to control reality be stripped of their power to perfectly perceive reality. If we could have highlighted that better, highlighted the fact that her corruption came from essentially a book that just twisted how she viewed the world, that it truly became, it kind of melted in her mind and showed her that it was her against the world and she had no choice in that. And her only option was to kind of kick in and everybody that was in her way in order to protect her boys. And it also kind of warped her perception of like how they were her children, but they were also the other Wanda's children, and the other Wanda was also protecting them. If we could have really honed in on basically her Anakin Skywalker level of misunderstanding the situation, and then still given a better conclusion where she would then be able to basically explain to herself the reality of the situation, I think it would have been better. But I think because I've seen other things that have the dark hold on it, I understood. Whereas if you're not going into that expecting the book to be the villain, you're just going to look at Wanda's actions compared to the Wanda Visions and Westview storyline, and kind of see a disconnect. And there still really is. I mean, I don't understand why we had to go through a corruption arc again when she's already kind of had this before. But if we had to do it, we should have done it a little more delicately. And honestly, it wouldn't have taken that many more scenes. And with it being a short Marvel movie, we had time to do that. And they just didn't take it.
One thing I appreciate, but I found under celebrated, I guess, within the movie was that, you know, if even if it's kind of left unexplained, we do understand how powerful the Darkhold is, in that it is something that has any effect on her, the strongest Avenger, almost definitely, right? And if we compare it to other, you know, epics like Lord of the Rings or something like that, the ring has the power to corrupt even the, you know, most pure of heart hero, blah, blah, blah. It's all analogous for like absolute power corrupts absolutely. She's still able to bring herself back from that. She's still able to talk herself back from that without even many others supporting or interfering. One might say nobody really supporting. There are people trying to fight her and stop her, perhaps rightfully so, but there's nobody really coming alongside her and trying to support her mental and emotional health, which is the thing that would actually get her out from under the power of the Darkhold. She's able to do that on her own, or a version of her in another universe. And that, I think, is really cool. It's kind of unique. That is a unique way to sort of perceive this story in relation to a story with absolute power potentially corrupting you, especially in relation to like what you're trying to do with your kids. So I don't know. I thought that was cool.
Well, and it would have been really helpful if, yes. No.
Sorry.
It would have been really helpful.
That was a paid actor.
That was a paid actor. That it would have been really helpful if they also had kind of highlighted, you know, the scene at the end of WandaVision where she's basically told, I'm just completely spacing on her name, but basically she says, like, they'll never understand what you sacrificed. And she forgives Wanda, but only she forgives Wanda, and nobody else will ever understand. And after this, after all the things that has happened in this movie, the only person that could ever understand Wanda or forgive Wanda is Wanda. And there is something powerful to that they could have really explored more, or like delve deep into, that they kind of missed an opportunity by trying to make America the one that shows her the true path. And which is so sad, because America had such a great like character design. Like, she should have been a really great character, but she was very much used as a plot device for both of the other characters' stories, to her own detriment.
Let's talk about America, because I'm curious what you all thought about her. And I'll go first. So you know me, I'm gonna excuse even the worst of female superheroes, because I think men get away with garbaggio in superhero world. So we can have a less than perfect female superhero as well. So things that were done well. Her performance, fantastic. I thought it was really good casting. I thought that the young lady playing her did a wonderful job, both with fight sequences, with emotional sequences, whatever. Her writing, the writing they did for her was it had some ups and downs. It was a little cheesier than the rest of the movie, as if they're trying to remind us that she is a kid, but it wasn't consistent. Sometimes it came across as like spunky little 12-year-old, and sometimes it came across as like teen, and sometimes it came across as like these are just lines you'd write for an adult, but you just need her to be the one to say it. And that's okay for a new character, but that's why it's kind of in the middle. Let me tell you what was low. The special effects for her. Is Marvel going bankrupt? Why are we doing stars this way? Why are we being this literal? I just want to know why she's punching through air and a literal star is exploding when you could do so many other cool star inspired things. You could have things rip in somewhat star patterns. You could have star bursts kind of meld the lines between the two universes. Why was her special effects so poor?
Well, I
I
don't
mean,
know.
go
ahead,
ahead,
Kate. I'm
Carey.
sorry.
I agree that the use of the literal star was very cheesy. I would say the quality of the actual execution was fine. It was on par with the rest of the movie. But the concept itself was very cheesy, and it's once again Marvel not knowing how to write like a actual teenager. She's supposed to be 15. I think the actress was pretty closely cast as well on age. But yeah, they sometimes would write her as a 12-year-old. Sometimes they'd write her as a very snarky young adult. That would like outwit uh, Doctor Strange, and then other times she had to basically say the most emotionally heavy line that she didn't really have the rationale to say those things. And then you back up the fact that her entire storyline was very uh, for the use of other characters and unearned in her own right. It was a little disappointing.
What I'll say is this: as far as how the character was written or how she was used, it just sort of felt like to me that she was sort of like a yo-yo, sort of being pulled along to, as far as the story is concerned, and to a great degree, it just sort of felt like they brought this interesting character in, and they were sort of had this idea in my thought. I don't know if they're going to do this, but it's like, hey, if she's popular, we'll put her on a Disney Plus show somewhere and sort of flesh more of her story out. And I don't know if they're going to do that or not, but it sort of speaks to one of my bigger issues with Marvel stories is that they always feel like they have so much to do in terms of telling the story that you went into the theater or to get, and then sort of help sow seeds for stories that they want to tell in the future. And I think that sometimes they do that incredibly well. Sometimes, for the most part, it's done to the detriment of the story that they're trying to do in the movie or television show that they have in front of you. So it just felt like you just sort of see bits and pieces of her, and it's sort of like, well, okay, well, I guess we'll see more of her in something else. And as a viewer, you sort of get the same impressions like, well, do I really need to pay as much attention to her as I need to? Because I get this feeling that, well, they'll just stuff on a Disney Plus show and I'll get that story there.
And if it's anything
I
like
don't know.
WandaVision leading into this, we can't even guarantee that the Disney Plus show will be the same, lead. WandaVision didn't perfectly lead into this movie, or this movie didn't perfectly follow from WandaVision, would be a better way to put it. And if this movie is setting up for somebody else's Disney Plus show, in that context, we're not inspired to invest a lot in her storyline now, when more than likely the Disney Plus show would be about it. I don't know if that makes sense. Bishop distracted me by trying to share the microphone.
I also wanted to add this, the comment you made about the special effects looking cheesy, and I know there's a difference in the budgets between movies and television shows, but if you've seen the She-Hulk trailer for
No,
the
but
new
I saw the
series,
poster.
Mhm.
it looks incredibly fun, and I'm really looking forward to watching it. But what I will say is the CGI on it was less than impressive. And I know it's a Disney Plus television show, not to compare it to a movie, but there is a level of expectation that Marvel folks have for their product that this sort of feels like it's not meeting that. So I'm assuming she won't Hulk out as much on the show because the
Right.
CGI just didn't look great. So maybe Marvel is having a sort. Maybe it's not the money issue. Obviously, maybe it's sort of the production and the ability to do it. I don't know.
I think there's something to be said with how much they try to put out all the time, that I wonder if they're stretching some of their better crew and people so thin across other projects, and they're not monetarily suffering, but I think the quality of the product is possibly suffering.
Let's talk a bit about the characters that, well, much like Elizabeth Olsen, I sometimes forget they were in the movie. Let's talk about the Illuminati. All of the people that she took down, made quick work of, all of our guest stars, all of our cameos, all of our X-Men, all of our everything. What did you think of all of that, including Miss Peggy?
Who wants to go first?
You can go first.
All right. What I'll say is this. There is absolutely no doubt that Wanda is the strongest Avenger, without a doubt. I don't even think it's a question. I think the presence of the Illuminati, which was fine, I think it would have been more impactful if it had happened before Spider-Man: No Way Home, when they had sort of the cameos that they had in that movie, and it sort of like there was a shock value of having that. And so when you see the Illuminati in this movie, I don't know if it had the same impact, quote unquote, seeing Professor X, and those other characters. I think some of that impact was lost. But without a doubt, I mean, the mission that Wanda was on and how she was wrecking shop, the fact that she totally obliterated them, was not a shock to me. Probably how quickly it happened. And again, that probably has more to do with the movie's runtime than anything else. I don't want to say that I was underwhelmed with the Illuminati, but just like I said, having the sort of wow factor of like the alternate Spider-Man in No Way Home sort of took away from seeing the cameos that we saw here. That's just my initial thought.
For me, I've had, out of cameos go, I actually kind of prefer cameos like this, where you get the cameo, you get to enjoy it, but it has no real effect on the quality of the story, just as a sacrifice to bring in these other characters. They brought in like Mr. Reed Richards, which everybody really wanted John Krasinski to play him, and he played him decently well. I don't really know the character enough to judge how it should have been. I know he's supposed to be really smart, but not very wise. I'd say at least he got that, the not wise part right. But I don't know. What I will say is that the Peggy, I like to see the Peggy Carter bit. It was just fun for me to see her in the actual garb in live action. But the better part of it was, is I've seen other cameos like that done to the detriment of the overall story. This one could have been done a little better. It's not perfect, but I will say they were kind of arrogant, kind of just lackluster to the better point of the story. I think that was actually probably intentional, because it was far more about Strange and how he had a twisted relationship with him in that universe is one, and how it affected him, and it gave a better look at him. And then just another visceral comparison that Wanda is still being reasonable. If Wanda can walk through there, and especially they are this Earth's mightiest heroes, and just rip Reed Richards into ribbons and chop Peggy Carter in half with her own shield, then it's very clear that she is not going to be stopped by anybody at all, ever,
I
except
loved
herself.
I loved the "this is me being reasonable" line and how that
This
was
is
used as
me.
a refrain throughout. Incredible and meme
Yes.
worthy at the same time. Please continue. Sorry.
Well, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but to be honest, in this movie, her body count, like her kill count, was actually quite low. She didn't kill that many people, technically speaking. Technically speaking. Technically, Tony Stark, while being a hero, killed way more people than she killed here. Now, is that a justification for her actions? No.
Yes,
But
it is a justification for her actions, and she never did anything wrong. Never once.
She didn't kill. She didn't
But
kill more people. She killed more faces. People we
She
know.
That's true. She
yeah,
killed more
that
she
is
killed more wannabe heroes. But let me tell you what okay, the comment Kate made that I really appreciated was that these side character cameos were a little forgettable and that might be intentional. And I agree, and I think that's one of the strengths of this movie. Not everything needs to be an ensemble. And Marvel loves an ensemble. Unless it's Spider-Man, Marvel tries to turn everything into an ensemble. And even if there is a title character and it's not an ensemble, they'll still try to put a cameo in there that's pushed so hard to where it may as well be like a pseudo ensemble for a portion of the film. And sometimes that's okay. A good example is like in Black Widow's movie, there were a bunch of richly developed side characters, including, the villains and the people like on the villain scale, such that even though it was a Black Widow movie, there were these kind of ensemble team up moments, of course, her sister as well. In this movie, we already have the title character being the most boring character in the movie. I don't even dislike Strange. That's just like that is the reality for this movie, okay? When you also have Scarlet Witch and you also have the introduction of America Chavez, both of those two characters are either good or have the potential to be good. You also have the people that they will have as their side characters or accomplices, which Scarlet Witch had basically none, but we're bringing in her kids, we're bringing in alternate version of her, so on and so forth. You just don't have room to really fully flesh out and develop every Captain America and X-Men cameo that you want to throw in there. They have to show up for a quick little fight sequence and the applause and the Easter egg and then be written out. So I love that they didn't have like a big, long developed thing for once.
That's a good point.
yeah, I agree. It it also was a little bit of an insert Avengers team, more to the point that, yeah, Wanda was an Avenger and she still had good relationships with some of them. Some of them being like Steve and Hawkeye and them. And I would still probably say Natasha, but I don't know. There were several other people who did not like her or actively were against her and did not appreciate both her power and were part, in fact, the reason why she was so ostracized, so hated, and was unable to control said power. And the fact that she goes up against a stand-in team and absolutely destroys them in her mom sweater and jeans, it's very it's a little bit visceral how they did that, which was funny. It was a little bit of a refrain back to Civil War and all the troubles that happened there.
You know what I'm waiting for?
Hmm.
I'm waiting for someone to sort of sync up that Illuminati destruction scene to like the theme from like Friday the 13th or some horror movie, Halloween or something. Because I mean, that's what you got when she comes walking through there. It's like no one's leaving that room alive. You knew that from the moment she walked in.
I love the horror movie themes that they wove into this, with the asterisk of I kind of wish there was horror movie elements throughout the movie, not just surrounding Wanda. I understand that she is the scariest person there, and I fully agree with that. But the horror elements, like her going through the mirror, that was incredible special effects. That was great. That's a good example. But I kind of wish they had done that with some of the other characters, because it kind of leaves you with this sense of like she's the only like freaky horror creepy thing. And I think that there's a little freaky horror creepiness to Strange, and had they played into it more, like for example, I know this is a big wish and they wouldn't do this, but wouldn't it have been way more interesting if his fascination with the Christines from the other universes came across as creepy and bad? And isn't that way creepier than Wanda wanting to protect her boys in the other universes? Because his fascination with
I
Christine is already wrong. It already goes against the rules of the universe that we're told, which is that these are different people. So if he truly loved the original Christine, not just anybody wearing her face will do. It'll give a double take, it'll tug at his heartstrings, but he's not going to really like love these other ones. So it's already creepy and wrong. Like, why couldn't that have been the creepy one? And wouldn't that have been a little more relatable?
I posit that it was already creepy enough with just a redheaded version of Christine, which also, Marvel, I see you. I see the fact that she was a redhead next to Wanda. It's not, you're not sly here. But also, I would even argue it would have been really great if they amped up just a slight bit more of the horror and really emphasized that it actually wasn't Wanda specifically that was the horror element, but the Darkhold.
Mm-hmm.
Because then whenever Strange used it, they could have really gone into how creepy the Darkhold is. And yet again, that could have been a visual and audio way of explaining to the audience what's really bad here is not Wanda, it is the Darkhold. And that it could have been a great storytelling device that's not necessarily through dialogue or acting, but through visuals and sound effects.
That's way too smart for Marvel. I love it.
I've got I got two things that I wanted to add. One thing is sort of a comment. The other one's a question. The first comment is I actually love the way the movie ended, right? With Strange having the third eye protrude and screaming out in agony, and then the screen goes. I thought that was freaking fantastic, sort of like stop motion. Wow, what in the world's going to happen next in this whole story? And then, of course, you get the mid-credit scene, and basically he's walking down the street, no big deal. And it's like, you just had this incredible ending, and then a few minutes later in a mid-credit scene, you basically ruin it by basically showing that, hey, everything's okay. I thought that was a terrible decision. But my question is this. Where does the character of Wanda go from here? Because we know she ain't dead, right? So where'd she go? What did she do?
I'm going to let Kate take this one.
I don't know specifically where she goes, what they do. I would argue that they initially wrote this movie for her to actually die. And then they saw the success of WandaVision, realized that she was like would be their cash cow of this phase, and was like, let's not do that. I am concerned that they might continue to push and pull her in opposite directions against the the growth that she had in WandaVision and the small amount of growth that she did finally achieve in this movie too. But I will say they'll probably couch her for a little while, and she won't come up into any movies that are moderately realistic, like in the real world, grounded, I would say. But the next time that we get a more mystic type movie or production of any kind, movie, TV show, I would be willing to say she'll pop up. That could be Loki. That could be another Doctor Strange thing. That could be, I guess, the Secret Wars is kind of in space and stuff. That could be a thing. Whenever Captain Marvel comes back, any of those things. And I would say that she will still kind of always exist as the exile of the group. She will always be the one that they don't trust, the one that they are unwilling to ask for help, and she will always be the one that will have to be the most powerful. And in her story, that could be very interesting, but because she probably won't get her own story in a movie either ever or in a very long time, it'll probably be for the detriment of everybody involved. Because it will be a strong hero that has to come in and save the day because you guys couldn't handle it yourselves. And they've written her to be so powerful that if she can't come in and save it, then where is she? What is she doing? It's going to be something they're going to have to balance. It's going to be a little bit like the Eternals question of like, where were they? Why weren't they there? But we'll see. I don't have a firm thought of where she'll come up. I will say, to comment on the ending, I know that Cammie was very concerned or confused as to who that woman was. I now have confirmation that we will have another Doctor Strange romance. That is who he marries in the comics.
Okay.
So take from that what you will. And also,
Purple Lady, is that what you're talking about?
Purple Lady. Purple
Gotcha.
Lady is his future wife.
Gotcha.
Also, to add to the insanity that is the conspiracy theory that never stops in my brain, I couldn't focus on those last scenes because all I could focus on was the fact that he was wearing his own personal pair of shoes, because he wears the same shoes in interviews. Yes, I did just Sherlock Holmes. Thank you. I rest my case.
So you're saying the next Doctor Strange movie is not going to be buddy cop with him and Scarlet Witch the way I wanted this movie to be?
Yes, it will probably.
You're cutting out, so I will take that as a no. Well, that brings us to a perfect wrap-up point as we are right at 10. I think I could probably continue to talk about this movie for another 2 to 3 hours, which is a testament to it having a lot of high 10 or 11 moments. And I didn't even rip into the Phantom of the Opera themes yet. I could go a full hour on that, but we won't. Well, guys, next week is right before Memorial Weekend, so we might do a little time skip next week and maybe come back June 1st with who knows what we will have watched between now and then. Maybe even the Downton Abbey movie. Fingers crossed. Till then, thank you for chatting with me about Multiverse of Madness. Thank you, Stormy, for sharing your thoughts in the chat as well. One last thought from her. She says, I wouldn't be surprised if Wanda doesn't continue to be used as a villain. That eventually leads to her death. Wouldn't be surprised. Well, you and I will hope not, Stormy, but, even if she continues to be a villain, I'll continue to defend her actions. Carey and Kate, thank you for joining me. This was fun.
Thanks for having me.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.